Welcome. I'm Father Mitch Packwell. Welcome to Ewtn Live, where we bring you guests from around the world. Our guest tonight is a popular author and internationally renowned speaker on Catholic spirituality, on marriage and family life, and apologetics. As a Catholic deacon and a Black man with a professional background in law enforcement, he also has an interesting set of perspectives, an important set, and he has experiences to back them up in order to draw for a serious discussion about issues concerning Black Lives Matter movement, critical race theory, and liberation theology, all of which he tackles in his newest book, which is called Building a Civilization of Love, a Catholic Response to Racism. So please welcome Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers. Deacon, it is so good to see you again.
Thank you. It's great to be with you as always, Abuna.
Yeah, thank you. You know, the issue of racism is obviously something that is going to have affected your life, as it does every. That's one thing. It's not an issue about Black people. Everybody's affected. If you are a racist, if you are a victim of racism, or if you're saying, what's going on? You know, you don't understand. It still has an effect and an impact. Talk, first of all, about that aspect. Now, what do we mean by racism?
Yeah, and that's an important distinction we need to make between racism and prejudice.
Yeah.
Because what's happening in our culture today, those terms are getting conflated.
Yes.
And so whenever there's a negative interaction, it's always labeled as racist. And so I thought it was important to start by saying, well, wait a minute, we have to separate racism from prejudice. So the way I define it is prejudice is making a preconceived notion or judgment about someone without any objective knowledge or subjective experience. And racism is prejudice, as I just defined it, with the added piece. The reason why I believe this, or why I just said this to you, is I believe my race is superior to your race.
Yep.
Okay? So here's the example I use in the book. At a parish mission, a guy came up to me, he found out I went to Notre Dame, and he said, oh, you went to Notre Dame, what position did you play? Now, he made an assumption. He looked at the size, Notre Dame, he must have played football, right? That's a prejudiced statement, right? Based out of ignorance.
And he was being positive. He would have liked to have met a Notre Dame football player.
So it wasn't.
But he didn't.
It wasn't malicious. It wasn't anything. Now, people say that's racist. Well, it's not. In order for it to be racist, he would have to have meant when he said it. The reason why I just said that to you is I believe that people of color aren't intelligent enough to get into an academic institution of that caliber. And the only way that someone like you can get to a place like that is with athletics.
Yeah.
That would have been racist.
Yeah.
But that's not what he meant, because when he found out that I had an academic scholarship and never played football in my life, he went, oh, Deacon, I'm sorry. It was okay. Now, what he should have said was, oh, you went to Notre Dame. What did you study? Because that's what he would have asked anybody else.
Yeah, exactly. And this is, you and I have known each other a very long time. Yep. And, when we first met, you were one of my students, and you had talked about how you had that academic background. So we already had established a relationship, and we, whether you went to Notre Dame or not, it was just that this is your background that I was interested in as it affected what we were studying in theology. So that would be, I think the normal thing, and that's a very important part. And I think also with prejudices, we have to realize that people are prejudiced about a lot of different identities.
Exactly, yes.
Jewish people experience prejudice. Most of them are not African American or African descent. There are Jews from Africa, but most of them are not. So it's not about African background, it's about the religious background. Or you can be prejudiced about Catholics, we get that, You can be prejudiced about Protestants. You can be prejudiced about all kinds of things when you identify yourself to separate yourself and make yourself different.
Exactly. When I first started coming here, I think my first series was 2005 with Ewtn. I thought, wow, I'm coming to the South. Everybody here must eat shrimp and grits because that's what I've always heard, living in the North, that people, and I come down here to find out that, gee, not everybody likes shrimp and grits.
No, sometimes it's like cheese grits.
So that was a prejudiced notion that I had about people in the South. It wasn't malicious or anything, but it was just prejudice because it was based out of ignorance. I had no experience really of anyone, just what I saw on television, what I heard. And that's how we get these prejudices, by the way. I make this argument in the book. Because we're not born racist or prejudiced. And I think anecdotally we see that when children playing, right? You see 3, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds on the playground, they're not looking black or white or Asian or Hispanic. You know, they're just kids playing. They don't care what they're, right? They're just playing. But what happens over time? We begin to hear jokes. You see things on television. You see things on social media. You see things about certain race of people, movies, the way people are depicted, the way, and you begin to think, because especially if you don't have much interaction with people of color, you start to think, oh, this just must be how they are. Again, not angry and malicious, but you're starting to build up these prejudices, these preconceived understandings and ideas about people or races or whatever it may be. And then when you finally meet someone, you know, it kind of, because it's a great example. So my freshman year at Notre Dame, now remember back in those days, there's no internet, there's no social media.
You're old.
Yeah, I know, right? you got a letter that said, here are your roommates, their names and where they're from. So you couldn't look it up, you could, right? So I get to the room, I lived in a triple that year, and I was the first one in the room. So I said, oh, I don't want to unpack anything. I want to wait till the other two guys get here. We can figure out what we want to do. So as I'm waiting, I pull out my guitar, and that was 1984. And so Van Halen's 1984 album came up, so I was learning Panama, one of the songs on that record. Yeah. So I had my guitar.
I'm older. I don't even know that.
Right. So I have my guitar out, and I start playing, and one of the guys walks in the room. So he looks at me and goes, which one are you? Because remember, all it was a letter with names and where you're from. I said, I'm Harold. He goes, you're black. And I went, really? I went, this is not good. That's his first thing, you're black. And then he saw me with my guitar. He goes, what are you playing? I said, Van Halen. He said, black people listen to Van Halen? And I'm like, oh, this is bad. And my first impression was like, this is going to be a rough year. But what happened during that year? We got to know each other. See, the thing is, he was from an affluent suburb of New York City. He's never had any really interaction. He said he had one black kid in his high school that wasn't even in his class. And so he never had interaction. Now he has to live with me. And all he knew was what experiences he had on television and whatever he learned from his friends about people of color. So now he has to live with me. But during that year, we got to learn from each other, get to know each other. And we became friends. We roomed together the next year. And then after graduation, he was in my wedding, I was in his wedding. And we're still friends to this day. It's a beautiful experience.
I think that is one of the key factors. And it's one of the odd things that so often people don't know each other. Neither blacks know whites, whites know blacks, yet alone Asians and other groups that you just hang out. I generally find because here I'd say in Birmingham, the interaction with black folks, white folks is pretty much part of normal life. It's just everybody's here, and you just work together. And it's about as different here to be black or white as it is to be Italian or Polish in my neighborhood.
Exactly.
That's about it. And I have more in common with the other guys because they're guys and we share those experiences than the differences in terms of our background. So this is something that is a lot of fun. And to me it is fun, and including the differences, because being guys, you rib each other. You just jape at each other, and that's just part of
life.
life.
I think that's something that we need to better appreciate. When you look at the universe, you look at nature, God created such an incredible richness and diversity within nature, within the universe, and we're still continually discovering and uncovering the depths of the richness of this world and of our universe. And it's the same thing with people.
Exactly.
It's the same thing with people.
Exactly.
It's a wonderful diversity of language and culture, especially traveling around the world, as I have the 31 different countries, to experience different people, to experience their culture, their food. It's just a beautiful thing to get to know individuals and people.
Yep.
You know, and that really helps to break down these walls of prejudice and racism that some people may have.
Yeah, when my buddy Al Pavin's grandmother from Italy made cookies, I was there. But he'd be over at my place when my mom made kolaczki. You know, the differences of that was just part of the way we grew up. Now, there are two problems, I think. There is bigotry. And some of it is based on race. And what you see is when you look back on history, for instance, in the Roman Empire, a third of the population was slaves. They were enslaved. But 95% of them, if not more, were white. Slavery had nothing to do with race. And the removal of slavery by the influence of the church had nothing to do with race. You know, that wasn't the issue. But in the modern era, as slavery, from Africa, the Atlantic slave trade started, and this is part of my theory, all the Europeans that were engaging in the slave trade, usually with the Turks. It was the Arabs and the Turks who had been doing the slave trade for 200 years before the Europeans started it. And when the Europeans, the Christian Europeans started it, they had to come up with some false justification. They knew slavery was wrong. The church taught it. And they came up with theories of racial inferiority. That's what is part of my sense. And the second issue, and this was confirmed by Charles Darwin, and others. Darwin saying that blacks are a race in between, or a species in between the ape and the human being. That was, the great Charles Darwin said, this is the way it is. He confirmed that. But the second thing is the politics of using racial difference to make sure that you keep these groups going at each other. Meanwhile, I'm in the background making money and getting power. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. One of the things a couple of things. First about the slavery issue. I do talk about that in the early chapters of the book, and I have to, because some people will say, well, look at St. Paul. You Catholics, you Christians, you justify slavery. Look at St. Paul says, slaves, be obedient to your masters. And in fact, that's what slave owners use to justify. They use the Bible to justify how they were treating black slaves in this country. And so what I have to show is when you say slavery, what do you mean by slavery? Right? So I look at the Old Testament, particularly the book of Leviticus, that talked about 6 different types of slavery.
Right.
And we know for a fact that St. Paul was not talking about chattel slavery, because it's very, very clear in the Word of God. God says, you are not to enslave other people, even your enemies, because you were once slaves in Egypt. So it made it very clear that it could not possibly be that type of slavery that St. Paul was talking about. But see, when people hear slavery, they're thinking in the context of what you just said, Father, about what happened in this country. But you look at other types of slavery, for example, indentured servitude. So you have a family that has maybe 3, 4 kids, and they have another child. They can't afford to feed that child, and so they give that child into indentured servitude to another family. Now that child, would grow up in 7 years, was the Jubilee year, the slaves were released, but they also had rights. They could become, at the end of that time, they become members of the family, and they had rights during that time so they couldn't be abused. It wasn't what people think slavery is when they think about that word. Also, right now, if you have low-level crimes, you see the prisoners in the orange jumpsuits picking up garbage at the side of the road. They also had that as well in the Old Testament. They called that slavery.
Right.
So you just can't put a blanket statement around that word without understanding the context which St. Paul was speaking.
One other key part, especially in the Roman Empire, where Paul was addressing that to a Greek-speaking community, the Romans had amazing success from the 3rd century forward in conquering people. When they conquered Italians, they mostly worked out ways to incorporate them into the Roman Commonwealth. But when they started conquering the rest of the world in Carthage and in Greece, in Macedonia, what's Asia Minor, now Turkey and the Middle East, they would either kill everybody or they'd kill one section and keep the rest as slaves. The only alternative they had was to execute everybody. And so the reason there were 1/3 of the population enslaved, they had conquered the world. And they had enslaved so many people. And it really messed up their society to do that, by the way. This is not a good policy. It ruined their economy in Italy because people had so many slaves, the poor had no jobs. And so that was, and they all had to go on government welfare that the other countries were sending taxes to Rome to feed the Roman population who couldn't get a job because they already had slaves. It was an economic mess. And that was another kind of slavery, the war booty slavery.
I addressed that in the book as well. You're exactly right.
And that's what he's addressing. But he worked for the freedom of Onesimus.
That's right. Yeah, and I also talk about that in the book as well.
See, this is
exactly right. And to your second point about race as a vehicle to power, I also addressed that in the book as well, because one of the things that I did is I looked at the writings of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now we all know about I Have a Dream speech and all that, and I really honestly never delved much into his work before, but when I read Letter to a Birmingham Jail, in a Birmingham jail, when I read his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, I was like, this guy gets it. He totally gets it. And so what's happened since his death, because he was able to bring people together, and so since his death, we've had an emptiness, a void, a vacuum. And that vacuum is being filled with people and organizations. It's like a Trojan horse. Race is on the outside, but really on the inside, there's an agenda that has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with pushing another agenda.
Which is mostly a Marxist agenda. I want to give one of the quotes you have in your book from Martin Luther King Jr.'s acceptance of the Nobel Prize for Peace, which itself was a powerful experience in this country, that he had been working so hard for racial justice, for African Americans to be able to vote and live where they want. This was remarkable. Well, he won the Nobel Prize, and on December 10th, 1964, he said, sooner or later, all the people of the world will have to discover a way to live together in peace, and thereby transform this pending cosmic elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. If this is to be achieved, man must evolve for all human conflict a method which rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. And that gets at the core, or the title of your book.
Yes.
Creating a culture of love. You're continuing on what he said and what Pope St. John Paul and Pope Paul VI had said about creating a civilization of love.
Yes, exactly. 1 John 4:16, God is love, and he who lives in love lives in God, and God lives in him. So we're not talking about, the groovy type of love that Phil Collins spoke about or anything like that. This is a love that, the agape love, right? Or hesed, that self-giving, self-sacrificing love, the outpouring, the complete gift of self, right? That's the foundation of covenant relationship. That's the kind of love that we need to, that's going to overcome racial division, But the problem is when you don't look at it that way, when I look at you, Father, I don't want to see white first, right? Now, I want to see you. And because I'm able to see the image and likeness of God in you, I'm now able to appreciate all the other things, your Polish background, your incredible knowledge of scripture and biblical language, and many other languages too, besides the biblical languages, and all the other things you bring, because now I'm looking at you the way God sees you. I'm looking at you through God's eyes. And then that opens my heart to allow me to appreciate everything that you bring to the table now. That's what I'm trying to achieve in the book. But what is going to happen, what I anticipate, is that people will look at the 3 chapters on critical race theory, Black Lives Matter movement, and liberation theology, and say, well, that's the focus of the book. And it's not. And the only reason I bring those things up is because people in the church are trying to say, hey, these are 3 ideologies that we can incorporate to help ameliorate racial division. I'm like, okay, well, let's be fair. You know what? Instead of saying, well, I'm just going to quote what this person says and that person says, I want to find out for myself. So I studied those 3 things in depth and wrote about, okay, is there something here that we can use that will help us take a brick out of the wall of racial division? And that was my approach.
Yeah. Here's, I like to go chronologically because before Black Lives Matter or critical race theory started, you had liberation theology. That goes back to the 68, when a guy named Miranda, who, like the other liberation theologians, they came from Latin America, but they learned it in Germany. They didn't learn it in Latin America. They had all done their doctorates in Germany and then brought it to Latin America. What do you see going on in liberation theology?
So liberation theology, basically we have to liberate ourselves from sinful structures. John Paul II talks about social sin and personal sin, right? But he talks about both of them in the context of each other. What's happened with liberation theology, it kind of separates the personal sin from the social sin and focuses on the social sin. So in order to affect change, you have to change systems, structures, institutions. And that's where you start. And I disagreed with that because Jesus came to save people, not institutions. Yeah. And so you have to, in my view, you have to start with the person, because people make up institutions. So once you start to look at minds and hearts and work on that personal perspective, now you're able to change structures. And the way they look at changing structures, sometimes violence is okay in order if you want to change a structure, or tearing down the walls of division. And what that does, it actually makes things worse, not better.
Yeah, I was in Lima, Peru, back in 1975, and I was just, so embarrassed at this priest who, in the priest council, of that archdiocese, had spoken against allowing Mother Teresa and her sisters to come to Lima. And his reason was, they're going to help the really poor. And that'll delay the revolution. They'll take the pressure off of poor people by helping them now, and they won't rise up and revolt. And we need to make sure that they get so miserable that they revolt. And I heard about this when I went to their place. They were picking up a guy with no legs out of a garbage dump. He'd been He had no legs, and his family threw him in a garbage dump, and he couldn't move. So they picked him up and fed him and cared for him. That's what's going to stop the revolution? Picking babies out of the garbage. They would go to the garbage dump every day, just like the early Christians would do in Rome, picking up babies that people had thrown away. If saving them stops your revolution has a problem at its moral core.
That's right.
That would be, it's that kind of thing that I saw justification of, pain for a political purpose that I didn't. Yeah. The other thing too, and this was in the document on liberation theology that the Pope, well, at the time, Cardinal Ratzinger wrote, that it pits groups against each other. That's the Marxist approach, that you have, like in that story, you have to have this group against this group, and only in the conflict. It's picking up Marx's, thesis, antithesis, clash.
Yes, and that's the hermeneutic for change. Tension, conflict, and struggle, right? So it goes back to the Hegelian dialectic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for folks who don't know philosophy, this guy named Georg Friedrich Hegel had said you have to have one force and
thesis.
Then the thesis, another force comes against
Antithesis.
it. And then as they fight it out,
Yes.
they come up with
New synthesis.
And then a new
Synthesis becomes the new thesis.
Right, and then you keep, and this is how
That's right.
all of history develops. Well, there's some of that in history, yeah, but to use that as the way you should change.
Yes.
That's the problem.
That's the problem, and that's the thread that's woven in the fabric of liberation theology, critical race theory, and Black Lives Matter. They have all that same kind of Marxist element that underpins the ideology behind their approach to change. Mm-hmm. And again, I criticize it, not for the sake of criticizing it, but remember, I'm approaching this from the perspective, will this help us, those of us in the church, to really fight against racial division, to bring people together in harmony, in that hermeneutic of love that John Paul II talked about, that Dr. Martin Luther King talked about, that St. Paul talks about. And so I looked at them critically, looking at their tenets, not what I think they say. I looked at source documentation to see what they actually teach. And my conclusion is that it doesn't help. It doesn't help.
And this is one of the reasons, people may remember this famous scene when Pope St. John Paul went to Nicaragua.
Oh, he got off the plane?
And he got off the plane, and this priest, who was a Jesuit priest that had been part of the government, and he started shaking his fist at him.
Yep.
And the issue was, as a priest, we have to be a priest for everybody. I'm a priest of Jesus Christ, not this political party or that political party. And that's what he was objecting to. And later on, that's Cardinal. I think I know he left the society because he thought it was better to serve, to help the government, and rather than as a priest. And that's why we priests are not allowed to run for political office.
That's right, it's in canon law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we can't do that. We can't be for this group against this group, the way politicians would have us. We have to take a little break. We're going to come back in a couple minutes and continue on. We'll talk about Black Lives Matter and critical race theory and see what is the Catholic response to all that. So please stay with us. Welcome back. We are speaking about a really fun and important new book called Building a Civilization of Love, a Catholic Response to Racism. It's written by our guest tonight, Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers. And you can get it at ewtnrc.com, our religious catalog, where it is item number 5467. 5467. So I urge you to get that, given the way that these discussions are going today. You can also find out more about the various kind of work that Deacon is doing by going to deaconharold.com. Deaconharold.com. All right, so we talked about liberation theology, and that's kind of the granddaddy of these movements going on. And it had a strong Catholic background. A number of Catholic priests, theologians had helped to come up with it. And they even said that they were using Marx the way Thomas Aquinas used Aristotle. The problem with that is Marx is not that good a source. So let's take a look at how some more of that shows up. I think maybe to talk about critical race theory. What's going on there?
Okay, so when critical race theory looks at race, it defines race as not being about biological distinction or differentiation within a species or a culture. So it's not about black, white, Asian, Hispanic. It's not about Polish, Caribbean, French, German. It's a cultural construct, their wording, cultural construct, where the dominant race exercise dominion, authority, and control over the lesser races. That's their definition of racism. So where does that come from? So if you trace it back, critical race theory comes from critical legal theory from the 1970s, which comes out of critical theory, right, from the 1920s, which goes back to Marxist determinism, Marxist materialism, which goes back, as we talked about before, to Hegelian dialectic. And so what I do is I trace it back, then I have to move it forward to show how critical race theory goes back to the roots of these Marxist elements.
See, this, I think we're going to find a theme developing here now, because a lot of these things go back to Marx, who, and to understand these theories, what the problem is with it, Marx didn't believe in spiritual reality. Everything was the physical world. And yet they come up with these pretend games. It's not what's biological that a scientist can point to by objective means that can be checked by other scientists. It's what we create. A very odd combination of being materialist in thought and yet saying that everything is a mental construct.
Yeah, exactly. So when you look at the Hegelian dialectic, it was mostly used in hard sciences, right, where empiricism was brought into the fore. But what Marx did,
and by empiricism, you mean?
So empirical study, you have evidence, and what you're able to observe and test and measure.
And other people can confirm.
Correct.
It's talking about, in other words, looking at the real world.
Right, correct. So, so what Marx did, and actually along with Freud, this is even before Engels, he took that Hegelian dialectic and tried to apply it to more soft sciences like sociology and the way of looking at the world. And so you have bourgeois, proletariat. So the thesis and antithesis now comes out of the hard sciences into he's putting his way of thinking into this, and that's how you get socialism, for example. You know, and again, what's the foundation of change? Tension, conflict, struggle. You know, and as soon as I'm reading this, I'm like, that's not Jesus. That's not a Catholic approach to solving problems, to bringing healing and division. Jesus didn't do that. And so right away, you see problems with trying to incorporate that kind of thinking into a Catholic environment. It just doesn't fit. And so moving forward, you see critical race theory. And by the way, it's critical race theory, not critical race fact, although people treat it as if it were factual. And so what I did was I looked at the major progenitors of critical race theory. So Derek Bell, Richard Delgado, Janine Stefanik, Kimberly Crenshaw. I read their books because I want to see what they say, what critical race theory, not what this person, what they say. I want to look at their own words. And so as I'm looking, I'm seeing language that I've literally never seen before. Anti-essentialism, white over color ascendancy, intersectionality. I'm like, wait a minute, what is cisgender? I'm like, what is this language? So that chapter actually took a long time to write because I was trying to understand what they mean when they use these words I've never heard before. It's almost like they're trying to create their own language as a way of expressing their ideology.
As a matter of fact, I don't think it's almost like trying to create their own language. They are creating their own language. And when I was studying the New Age movement and cults, that was one of the standard techniques used by cults to either create their own languages, their own use of words, it'd be English of sorts, but even if they used regular words, they always would redefine them, and this is what we mean by that word, or they would invent new words. And by doing that, they kept a type of control of everybody in the group. Does that apply to, that's what was my experience in dealing with cults back in the 70s and 80s. Does that approach seem to fit this?
Fits it exactly. For example, they talked about white over color ascendancy. So there's just this innate understanding that white people just think, by their very nature, they think they're superior to black people. They even talk about being racism being innate. I said, "Ooh, hold on." So as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, this contradicts the Catholic understanding of original sin and natural law. I'm like, wait a minute, we can't use this. It doesn't work. And so I have to show why. Mm-hmm. Not just bashing them and criticizing them, but saying, okay, here's what they say, and it may be helpful in some other discipline, but it's not going to help us with racism. It's not going to work. When they talk about intersectionality, so they're saying what determines who you are is this intersection of race, political party, ideology. So well, who are you? Well, I am a Asian, female, same-sex attracted Democrat or whatever. And that's who I am. No, that's not. So it's amalgamation of these different things. And I'm thinking from a Catholic perspective, that's not who we are. So people say, for example, well, you're a black Catholic. I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm a Catholic who's black. Are you denying your black identity? Are you denying it? I'm like, no, listen, when I die and stand before our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ to be judged, he's not going to ask me how black I am. Yeah. He's going to say, did you pick up your cross and follow me? I gave you talents. Where's my 30-fold, 50-fold, 100-fold return on the investment I made in you? Now, by saying that, do I deny it? No, I'm from Barbados. I love my heritage. I love our food, our music, our culture. I still speak our dialect. I love everything about being black. I thank God every day that I'm black. But that doesn't define who I am. What color, what race, who I'm in a relationship with does not define me. I am a son of the living God and a brother of Jesus Christ. That what defines who I am. And so it's not changing words or inventing words. It's about intimate, personal, loving, life-giving communion and relationship with Jesus Christ. That's who I am. And that's where I start. And that is, I make the argument in the book, that's the foundation we need to start with if we're going to seriously address these issues. Forget about the ideologies. What did Paul say? That, there's going to be all these, people are going to come with all these different ways of thinking and lead us into fantasy and all this. That's what's happening now. And we have to get away from that and get back to the scriptures, back to the Word of God, back to the foundation of our Catholic faith.
In this, the double thing about it is, as you're pointing out, my real identity is not as Polish American. I love being Polish American. I love the Polish language, and I certainly miss my mother's food. But, and when I go see my cousins, they're fantastic cooks. I love it. But that's not who I am. And Jesus is not going to test my Polish grammatical abilities when I go to meet him. He's going to ask me a lot of other questions more along the lines he's going to ask you too. What I gave you the talents. Did you put it in the ground or did you do something with it? So this is the key for all of us. But the other side of it is they seem to recognize it's this fantasy set of constructs. These are all mental constructs you can kind of make up. And, other people can't really objectively observe it. It's not in the real world. That's one of the other concerns about creating identities that are like Mr. Potato Head, but less real.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's like this, again, like a patchwork kind of a thing in order to assemble something that's supposed to be real, that's supposed to be, see, what we look at the transcendentals, right? What is true, what is good, what is beautiful. And this is something that, in fact, they say that the Christian approach, Derek Bell says the Christian approach is basically worthless. Mm-hmm. So if he says that, why are we even thinking, incorporating this into our way of thinking?
Exactly.
And what it does, it pits people against one another.
But see, I am concerned that some Catholics say, "Oh, we can be friends. We'll be your buddy." It's like the kid on the playground who is on the outs and wants to be friends with the bully. And I'll be your friend. Here, you want my lunch money? Wait, do you need something to drink too? I'll give you that. It's that kind of eagerness to join something that I'll give up my identity as a Catholic because you look more cool, or you're the big guy in the playground right now. That, I think, is a mistake. Our identity is in Christ. We have just a few minutes. We can go on, but I want to make sure we also take a look at Black Lives Matter, and then we're already talking about the antidotes. But go ahead. Right.
So I remember during the pandemic, I was asked to do a podcast with a guy named George Manasseh in Sydney, Australia, and we were going to talk about Black Lives Matter. So George created a meme that just says, Deacon Harold's going to talk about Black Lives Matter. That's all it said. All of a sudden, I got these emails and people were defriending me on Facebook and stopped following me on social media because I thought you were Orthodox. I thought you were with the church, Deacon Harold. What are you doing? All it said was I was going to talk about Black Lives Matter. It didn't say what perspective I was taking on it. And so I said, look at this. And so George contacted me. Should I take it down? I said, nope, leave it up there because now people actually have to listen to what I have to say. See, so the word themselves engender this frustration within people.
But that also is a reaction that is just as superficial as the kid on the playground that wants to hang out with the bullies. No.
Yeah.
Pay attention and learn.
So, exactly. So the words Black Lives Matter, there's nothing wrong with those words.
That's right.
Okay? In fact, I even say in the book, I think it's a mistake when people say, well, all lives matter. Well, hold on. I think you have to understand why they're saying Black Lives Matter, not as a contradiction to all lives matter or Black Lives Matter more than anybody else's lives. We're saying here's a people who have been oppressed, whose voices have not been heard, who are raising their hands and say, hey, listen to us, pay attention to us. We have something. There's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. What's happened was because of this leadership vacuum that I talked about earlier with Martin Luther King and no one taking his place, you have people now that are trying to fill this void with ideologies that have nothing to do with race at all. And so this Black Lives Matter movement, again, the movement is the issue, not the words. And what they've done, they're trying to create division. And when you look at what their tenets are, it's not really about race. It's about the destruction of the nuclear family.
Bingo.
That's exactly what it is.
I mean, on their website, I screenshot their
I did too.
Website. I think they've taken it down.
They've taken it down, but I screenshotted it and I incorporate in the book exactly what their ideology is. Now, well, it's not. They took it down, so it doesn't mean that anymore. That's like Planned Parenthood saying, taking abortions off the website. So, well, look, it's not on our website, but they still do abortions. Come on, give me a break.
What is it that they said about the nuclear family?
They have this word called cisgender privilege. We have to destroy cisgender privilege.
Which means what?
So cisgender means that as a man, I identify as a male. As a woman, identifies as a female. And that marriage is a man and a woman. That's cisgender privilege. And so what we have to do is tear down cisgender privilege and bring up single moms. So wait, single mom, where's the dads? Elimination of male influence and male spirituality. All that's out the window. They have a very strong transgender agenda in there, and that's those same statements. You know, I'm like, what does that have to do with race? All those statements, you look at them, they have nothing to do with helping to bring people together around the issue of race. Nothing to do with it at all. Their own words.
Here's the other side of it, too. Already, 78% of African American children are born to unmarried parents. And this is something that started in the 1950s. Up through the 1950 census, African Americans had a lower rate of out-of-wedlock birth than Caucasians because they were committed to Christ and his church. They weren't Catholic, but they went to church. And the ministers had a strong influence in a really horrible set of situations. And Jim Crow laws were still enforced. Woodrow Wilson introduced Jim Crow to the federal government. Woodrow Wilson supported the movie, the first full-length movie on which was about the Ku Klux Klan, and Hollywood designed the Ku Klux Klan's outfit. Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
Before that movie, Birth of a Nation, the Klan just wore burlap bags with holes for their eyes. They got classy after Hollywood got in on it. And Hollywood designed this white sheet with the cross and all that. And they said, oh, that looks good. We're going to wear that now. And so the Klan took their clue from Hollywood. Something Hollywood doesn't like to remember, I think. Yeah. Be that as it may, this kind of Jim Crow was all over the place, and yet it was the African American church that called the families, this is our strength. And in the 50s, for the first time, African out-of-wedlock birth rate went up to 16%. It had been 4%. And it was up to 16 in a decade. And now it's gone from that to 78%.
And not only that, disproportionate number of abortions are done on people with color as well.
35% of abortions are killing African American children, even though they're about 12% of the population. 80% of African American children in New York and Washington are aborted. 80%. Though it's 60% of all children. Let me tell me it's not targeted.
So I'm saying, if that's the case, why aren't they advocating against abortion? That's killing our own people. Where is black entrepreneurship? What about what's going on in Chicago? I can't go into I'm black. I'm afraid of my own people in certain parts of this country. Why is it? Why aren't we fighting for that? Why aren't we fighting for better educational opportunities for our people? Why don't we focus on that instead of trying to destroy the family that's caused so much of the problems that we're seeing, not only within people of color, but within our whole nation?
As I've mentioned a number of times on my shows, 80% of prison inmates are the children of unmarried parents. That's 80% of the white guys, the Hispanic guys, and the black guys. And you want to break down family, that the connection between you know what it's like. You're raising a wonderful family, and it's a lot of work, and your role as a dad is essential. It's not an extra. It complements your wonderful wife, Colleen. And the two of you together, you need each other to raise the kids, not villages, a mom and a dad. And and then one of the sad things too about Black Lives Matter, I haven't been impressed with the way they've used the large amounts of money, what, 95 million bucks? I've not been impressed with the way that it's gotten to the regular folks.
Yeah, I think that was something that wasn't anticipated. Because remember, it started as a hashtag, you know, and all of a sudden it became a movement. And so when they started getting all the financial support, I think that was something that was not anticipated, you know. And so I think they saw it as an opportunity. And then because we're sinful, human nature, we're prone to concupiscence. Sometimes when opportunities like that present themselves, you don't always do the right thing with the resources that people are providing for you.
And what's odd about that is, on one hand, they also professed a Marxist ideology,
Yes.
as I recall.
Yep, and I quote that in the book. They say it themselves.
As someone whose family lived under a Marxist government in Poland, you know, I went over during the communist times and again after. And it just reminds me of how the commissars always did fine, but the people couldn't get food. You know, there's this tendency in Marxist societies.
Again, and that's the common theme in all the three, right? Liberation theology, critical race theory, Black Lives Matter, with this kind of Marxist element in there.
Now, we have 2 minutes. You've been already talking about what is essential, namely our identity in Jesus Christ. What would be your last comments about creating a society of love, say with Black Lives Matter and its anti-family and the others? What would be your...
Well, the last part of the book is I talk about what we can actually do. And I base it in the parish because that's our family.
Yeah.
So we're talking about destroying family? No, let's build up the family. Let's come together as parish communities. And I lay out systematically things that we can do from the parish level to build that civilization of love and then take that out into the culture. We don't have to wait for bishops or anybody to tell us what to do. You know, and I would make the argument that deacons, quite frankly, because one of the things that Pope Paul VI said that we're supposed to do is to help to empower lay ministry. We can take the lead at the parish level to help people come together, to build trust, to build love, and then go out there and show people, you know, the Catholic Church, they could take the lead from us for once. Hey, look what the church is doing. Let's follow their lead.
And in a situation like, you know, the breakdown of family and all that, you know, there are a lot of parishioners who are grandpa, grandma age. You can help in these families. We don't want to exclude the families where there's not integrity. Bring them in.
Exactly.
But act as surrogate uncles, aunts, grandmas, grandpas, dads,
That's
moms.
what happened to me. When my dad wasn't around, my mom made sure there were other men in my life, not take the place of my dad, but to give me an idea of what it's like to be an authentic man of God.
And this is, I think, I knew your mom.
Yes, you did. She loved you.
She was great. She was great. So she did well. Again, we're talking about a really important book for us to know. Building a Civilization of Love, A Catholic Response to Racism by Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers. It's at ewtnrc.com, item number 5467. And you can also go to deaconharold.com to find out more what he's up to. Deacon, I'm sorry we've run out of time, but thank you so much for being here with us. And may the Lord bless you all and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. And we can bring you Deacon Harold and all the other guests that we have only because the network is brought to you by you. keeping us in between your gas bill, your electric bill, and your cable bill. We appreciate your support, and with it, we'll be able to pay our bills too. God bless you, and thank you.